CS group, the Semantics, Cybersecurity, and Services group there. And as Harrison mentioned, I'm much interested in defending against cyber attacks. So my main point of focus is how can we detect whether an attacker is actually trying to compromise a computer system. Now, to know how we can defend against attacks, we have to know how we can attack ourselves, because that allows us to basically make sure that we know what the mind of an attacker goes through when they see a system, how they look for vulnerabilities in that system, and that allows us to defend against these vulnerabilities and to make sure that we can detect whether an attack is going on and hopefully mitigate the attack. So trying to either prevent it or make sure that the damage that the attacker does is minimized. And today I'm going to take you into the mind of the attacker, which means that today we will also do some real-world hacking. The hacking that I do, I will do in front of this entire auditorium. However, if you do want to play along with me and you've brought your laptop, you can play along on the website ths.eencs.u20.nl. I'm not sure if this is readable for everyone. So if you brought your laptop and you want to hack along, please make sure that you go to the university website. I think this is, if not, we will also do this together so that everyone can follow. So without further ado, let's first of all ask ourselves the question, what is a hacker? When I asked this to ChatGPT to provide me with an image, this is what ChatGPT generated. A guy in a hoodie, working on a laptop, being very secretive. This is, I think, the picture that we all have in mind when we think about hackers, right? Well, in the 1980s, this person on your right, Kevin Mitnick, was considered one of the most dangerous hackers in the world. Doesn't look quite like the guy in the hoodie, right? It looks a bit like a nerd, a bit like a guy that you wouldn't expect to be a dangerous hacker. Well, what Kevin Mitnick did was he manipulated people and computer systems to obtain source code of various operating systems. And back in the 80s, this was very much worth. So it was a lot worth in terms of money to get your hands on these operating system codes. In fact, he was considered so dangerous that once he was released, the FBI prevented him from accessing computers or even telephones, because he was suspected to be so good at hacking that he could whistle into a telephone and thereby launch the nuclear missiles of the US. Now, of course, this is not true, but that is how scared they were of this guy. So what is an actual hacker? It's not necessarily the guy in the hoodie, it's more your regular average Joe, like this person, Kevin Mitnick. A person who knows how technical systems work, a person who knows how people think and work, and a person who knows how to combine this knowledge to abuse such systems. Today, I'm not going to be talking about hacking. Instead, I'm going to be talking about ethical hacking. What is the difference? Ethical hacking, we are not going to abuse systems. Instead, we're going to use them. And we are going to use them to try and perform a coordinated vulnerability disclosure. What does this mean? It means that we're going to analyze technical systems to see if they have any vulnerabilities. And if we find such a vulnerability, we're going to report that vulnerability to the people that created the system so that they can fix this and make sure that actual malicious attackers or hackers cannot abuse the system, right? And this is a very important distinction because hacking is illegal. So if you try to take what I will show you today and put that in the real world, that is not allowed. You can and might be arrested for this. So take care of this. Why do I still show you how this works? It is still important to know how to hack to avoid common pitfalls when you are creating your own software, right? So you know how to defend against these attackers. We can use this knowledge to ensure that the systems that we create are secure against attackers. And we are doing this to make sure that we can inform the right people on how to defend against these attacks. So the great Spider-Man quote is of course present here. With great power comes great responsibility. So let's dive into this. How do hackers think? Hackers usually take multiple steps when they are analyzing a system. And the first step they take is called reconnaissance. And in a reconnaissance phase, people try to explore a system. They try to see, okay, what does this system do? What do we want to gain from it? And they also use this phase to look for potential vulnerabilities. Now, let's take a look at a real-world example. And if you have brought your laptop, this is the time to join me in looking at this. We are going to have a look at what is called a capture the flag challenge, which is a hacking assignment that you can do online to try and see how good your hacking skills are. And I will go into this in detail a little bit further on. But we are first going to look into a specific website that is vulnerable and that we can attack. This is a website that we are allowed to attack, so you won't get in trouble when you do. And when we are in a reconnaissance phase of an attack, we are basically going to explore what the specific application that we're interested in can do. So here we have a website, which is the website of the Extreme Sports Society. They have a forum. What we can see is that they have a couple of rules. We cannot talk about the Extreme Sports Society. And all sports that are posted here must be extreme. Okay, seems interesting. Let's explore the website a little bit further. For example, by going to this post here. We have an extreme golf post by a person called Lion Woods, who is talking about golf. And there are a couple of different people that are commenting on this post. Now, if we're exploring as a hacker, we might want to try and see what the system does. For example, we might want to post a reply. So we can say something like, hello. We reply, and indeed, our message is posted on the forum. Is there anything that is interesting in this website? Any suggestions from the audience? Sorry? An open text field, indeed. So we can basically put anything we want here. Yeah, that's very good. There's don't seem to be any limits in terms of how much characters we can post. So maybe we can post a very long message and thereby take the site down. I also see something interesting here. This word here, bold, is actually posted in bold, right? So that means that it will very likely accept some HTML code in our reply. So let's test it, right? Let's make another comment. And let's post something in italic, so tilted letters. We use the HTML italic signs, and we say something like italic. Let's see what happens when we post this. Oh, we see that we posted a comment that is in italic, right? Now, this is quite interesting. We know that we can post stuff. We know that we can use HTML. Sounds cool. What else can we find here? Well, we see that people are commenting here. We can return to the forum. We see something interesting here, saying admin only. That might be something as a hacker that we might be interested in, right? If admins only can access it, that seems to be worth something. So let's click there, see what happens. We come to the sign-in box. So apparently the admin only, we probably need to sign in as an administrator, right? You can try out some standard stuff, putting an admin. Who knows, maybe was stupid in signing up here. We log in, nothing seems to happen, right? Unlucky, but we tried anyway. We also see that every support here is extreme, except for this one. Seems to be violating the rules. And okay, here we see that this is not an extreme threat. And the admin has commented here saying, okay, this thread will be closed. So apparently people don't like it when we post non-extreme stuff. Maybe we can even try to abuse this. So say, okay, let's return to the forum. We create a new thread. Let's say, plays a nice sport, basketball. And we put some text here. Start the thread. Let's see, it gets added here. There are no replies yet. But maybe if we wait a bit, we see a person has commented something. They like to be first. And we see that the admin also came to our post and says, hey, this thread is not extreme, so we will close it. Okay. I think we've played around enough for now. We've done our reconnaissance. And we've already tried to see, okay, what can we do with this forum, right? How can we try to exploit this? What does an attacker do next? Usually, once we have explored this application a little bit, we start to come up with a plan. What do we want to do? And how do we achieve it? Maybe we need to use some specific tools. That could all be part of the resource development. Now, on the website that I showed you, there was an admin page. I think that might be an interesting goal, right? Trying to get to the admin page. Now, we also need to come up with a plan. How do we get to this admin page? We tried some passwords of an admin. It didn't work. We might try a lot of passwords. We might even try a tool that just tries 100,000 passwords and throw it against the application to see how we get in. Or we can try to find some other vulnerabilities in the website. Now, let's have a brief intermezzo to give some background so that everyone is on the same page. Let's first have a look at how authentication works on websites, right? We want to log in as an admin, so it might be good to know some basics about authentication. Suppose that we have a client, so a person visiting the website, and a server that is hosting the website. Then what normally happens is the client sends a GET request, so an HTTP GET request for some page that they want, in this case, a secret page. If the page is not yet accessible, then the server will ask to the client, okay, who are you? I can only show this page to someone who is maybe an admin. Then the client says, well, my name is John, and here's my proof in the form of, for example, a password. And then once the server says, your password is correct, then it will send you your data. Now, what is the problem with this? HTTP is a stateless protocol, which means that the server doesn't remember whether one request comes from a person that has already provided their authentication credentials, or whether it is a new user that is asking for the same data. Now, users, of course, don't want to send their credentials every time, so they don't want to be asked for their password every time they visit a new web page. So this is an issue. Now, how do we solve this in websites? We use what are called sessions. And the idea is that the client provides their credentials one time to the server, for example, using a login form. And then the server gives the client back a session ID cookie. And this is basically a random token that the client can send along with every subsequent request that they make sure that the server knows who is asking for this data and knows whether they have access to that data. So if the client then asks for the secret page, they provide the session ID, and the server will return their data. Then the client asks for another secret, provides the same session ID again. The server knows, hey, this is still the same client, so it will provide the client with the data. Now, that is how authentication works. Another feature of browsers is JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is a native language that is supported by browsers. And it allows us to basically do computations on the side of the client. So this is what a typical piece of JavaScript looks like. We can ask for parts of the web page. For example, an element on the page that is labeled with my label. Then we can modify that text. And then we can, for example, send a message to the user that the text has been updated. Right? So this is an example of how you can use JavaScript to modify parts of the code on the browser side, parts of the web page. And JavaScript almost gives you full control of the browser. So it can allow you to alter content on the page. It can allow you to track users. So for example, where did the user click at a specific point? You can do that through these event listeners. So for example, every time the user presses a key, we call this event function. We can use JavaScript to send and receive other HTTP requests. And we can also use it to access local information, like the session cookies that we just saw. Now, given that we now have this background knowledge, how can we use this to abuse a website like the one that we saw? Well, for that, I'm going to first talk a little bit about cross-site scripting. So cross-site scripting is a way to use JavaScript to modify parts of the website as served to the client. And we can do that in the following way. For example, suppose that we can provide content to the website by posting a reply like we did in the example before. This comment is not only sent to us users, but also to other users visiting the website. So if we post this as a comment and someone else visits the website, they will also see our comment. Now, what happens if we put HTML tags in our comments? Well, we can, for example, make this nice bold comment and display that on other people's browser. But now it gets interesting. What if we not use a bold HTML tag or an italic one like we just did, but use a script tag that allows us to input some JavaScript? And whenever another user visits that website, the code in that JavaScript will likely get executed. Right? So this is an example where we say, this is a comment. We insert here the script tags, and we put up a little annoying alert that says XSS, showing that cross-site scripting is available. Well, let's see if we can do something like that. Let's see if we put a comment here. We add a script tag. And we put something annoying here in the script that pops up a little alert box, which we do through the alert comment or the alert function. And we put something like hi. Now, if I post this, the browser will reload, read the comment, and say, hey, oh, this is, of course, the demo effect. Let's see if this still works. Down. So we write this alert, hi. Would like to be. Okay, let me quickly restart this just so that we can continue the demo. We press reply, course, the famous demo effect.
Which Wi-Fi network are you using?
I'm now using the UTN one. It doesn't matter. I will just continue this. For now, we will check out how this works in a bit. We can basically pop up one of these annoying alert boxes. So now, how can we exploit this? Right? We know about authentication. We know about this cross-site scripting. Now, what we can try to do is say, hey, let's use this cross-site scripting to, for example, get the session ID cookie from the admin, right? We can, for example, create a new HTTP request that posts the document cookie to a website that we control. Or we can modify this JavaScript in such a way that maybe once someone visits the forum page, it will take the session ID, put it in the comment field, and post it as a comment, right? These are all different ways that we can try to exploit this. So, this is one of the ways that we can try to exploit cross-site scripting. Now, let's continue the attack. Usually, once we've come up with a plan, which we now have, right? Our plan is to take this cross-site scripting, make a post somewhere to one of the forums, and try to get the admin to comment on that post so that we can trigger some sort of remote code execution within their browser. Now we actually want to do this. So I'm going to try and see if we can get this to work. And let's see if we post this, whether that works. This seems to work.
The local firewall is blocking you this post, but Kevin will share a Wi-Fi with you so that you can finish.
Yes, perfect. Let's do that. Like that. All right. Then let's try this one more time. Oh, this is good news, right? Because the university is actively trying to block these kind of attacks. So that is positive. So we post our hi comments, and indeed we get the annoying pop-up box. Now, of course, now we know how we can abuse the system. We also have to try and abuse the people. So we have to trick the admin into coming to our post, right? Because we want to, in the end, leak their credentials. So let's return to the forum. One of the rules that we saw is that we should only talk about extreme sports. And we saw that if we make a comment about a non-extreme sport, like basketball, the admin will come and visit our forum, right? So what we can do now is try to trick the admin into coming to our forum and crafting our own cross-site scripting. Now, before we try to trick the admin, let's first try to do this locally somewhere. Let's go to extreme ski jumping, and let's try to see how we can actually obtain the credentials for ourselves as a user. Because if we know how to attack ourselves, we also can use that knowledge to attack the administrator. Now, what I will do, first of all, is open my console. You do this with F12 on most browsers. And there we are going to play around a little bit with JavaScript to see, okay, what kind of JavaScript comments should we create or JavaScript methods should we create in order to trigger, posting our cookie here in the message field. Well, one of the first things that we want to do is we want to identify the message field, right? So what we do is we say document.get elements by ID. Then we are going to see what kind of ID this message field has. It has the ID input message. So we simply copy that. We say, try to get this input message. And as you see, my browser highlights that we've indeed selected this field. Now we want to go and put a value into that field. It's very easy. We do .value. And we can say something like our value is test. And suppose that we execute this, if I press enter, then indeed we've put test in this message field, right? Now, we don't want to put random text in that field. We actually want to try and get the cookie, because this cookie contains the session ID. Now, luckily, JavaScript also allows us to actually access the cookie through document.cookie. Now, if I execute this, my cookie gets posted or gets put into the message field, right? Now, I see here a forum session ID. I'm going to guess that this is the session ID that I was given when I was accessing this website. So we're probably going to look for this value. Now, after we put the message or put the cookie in this message field, we want to try and click the reply button. Now, how do we do that? Very same thing. We go to our document. You get the elements by our identifier. What we do is we look up the identifier of this reply button. It is submit reply. We're going to select that. You can see my browser highlights the reply button, and we're going to click it using the click method. Very convenient. Now, what happens if I press enter here? The page reloads, which means that we have sent a post request and retrieved the new version of the page. And we saw that we posted our own forum session ID here. Now, we basically have the two methods that we need to implement. And we have to make sure that they are triggered when the specific person visits the website. So the page should be fully loaded. Once that's the case, we should automatically execute these two JavaScript methods. Now, to do this fully, I made a little cheat sheet for myself. We go back to the forum. We're going to create our thread about basketball. And we are going to put in the following message. Enlarge this a little bit so that it's easier to read. So we can just put some text in here to make it look like a real comment. We put in our script tags. We put this event listener that basically says, once the full page is loaded, execute the following function. And the function contains our two methods. One that puts the cookie into the message box, and one that clicks the submit reply button. Let's start this thread and see what is happening. Well, we see that we have 0 replies so far, but let's reload the page. Maybe in the meantime, someone has visited. We see that there are a lot of replies. Let's see how that comes. Let's visit this. And we see that if we try to load the page, it continuously tries to post our cookie to the web page, right? We don't want to do that, so what we're going to do instead is just look at the page source code, which contains all the data but doesn't execute any of the browser script information. This looks something like this. Zoom in a little bit. What we can see is that our post is here at the top of the page within the script tags, which basically says every time this page is loaded, we execute this script. And then we see a couple of people, like quick mouths, that visited the forum and posted their cookie. Now, we're not interested in quick mouths, we're interested in visiting the admin. And this is the cookie that the admin posted. Their forum session ID is this long string. So now we have obtained the session ID of the admin. Let's copy this, and let's try to see if we can use that as our own session ID. So we go back to the page. What I will now do is go to my local storage on my browser, and I go to the cookies. And I see that I have a forum session ID set here to this specific value. This is my session ID. But what I can do is I can double click it and I can change it and just put in anything. And now my browser thinks this is my forum session ID. Well, I don't want it to be anything. I want it to be the specific section that we copied from the admin. So now the browser thinks that, hey, if I'm visiting a page, then I have the admin credentials. So I should be able to visit admin-only pages. So let's go to the admin-only page and see if it works now. I click it, and ta-da! We are able to access this. And this is a specific example of how an attacker uses this cross-site scripting to try and break into a specific vulnerable web application. Now, when you try to do this in the context of capturing flags, what you usually get is a flag, which is a string, like the one here, that you can use to obtain points in specific capture the flag competitions. I will talk about that later on if you're interested. But that is a practical example of how to use cross-site scripting for a real-world attack. So let's come back to the overview of what the attacker did. We basically try to establish a presence on the system by creating our own code and putting it on the system. All good? Perfect. What we did next is we abused the code that we had to run it on the admin side, on the admin's browser. And once they visited, we used that to steal the cookie. And this is called credential access. So we access the credentials of a specific individual, in this case, the admin. And because it is an administrator, someone with more privileges than normal users, we performed what is called a privilege escalation. And this can be done in a web page, but it could also be done, for example, on a computer. Suppose that you have Linux installed on your PC, then some commands you can only execute with sudo privileges. This is also a form of privilege escalation, trying to get sudo privileges. Vice versa, on the Windows system, you might want to get administrator rights. And once we gained this additional access, we basically collected data and exfiltrated it to our own system. In this case, the data that we accessed was the admin page, and we exfiltrated this specific flag to our own system, which means we did a successful attack, because we, as attackers, were able to read data that we were not supposed to access in the first place. All right, this is how an attack works, or a practical example of that. Of course, I also want to show you how we can try to use this knowledge to defend against attacks. One of the ways that we can defend against attacks is through prevention. by knowing what kind of mistakes we make or we can abuse as attackers, like the ones that I showed you just now, we also know that we have to avoid these kind of mistakes. Well, what was one of the mistakes that we found? We could just upload, for example, any kind of HTML tags to the forum. And maybe we want to prevent people from inserting script tags, because if script tags cannot be inserted, then that means that people cannot perform cross-site scripting and therefore not access the cookie of the admin, right? So knowing about how to perform such an attack also makes you think, okay, how should I design my system such that it is not vulnerable? Then we also have ways of testing a system. So by knowing how we can perform attacks, we can perform these attacks against the own systems that we develop, or we can hire specific people called penetration testers to try and hack into our own systems. Once they perform such a hack, they tell us, okay, this is how we perform it, so that in the end we can try to prevent actual malicious actors from doing this in the future. Then the final thing that we can do is something called fuzzing. And fuzzing is basically an automatic way of trying to test your system against specific kinds of input. So what a fuzzer does is it would take a website, like the one I just showed you, and just try to spam all kinds of different inputs to it. It would try to automatically detect if it broke something. And if that's the case, we know, hey, this specific input triggers this specific vulnerability. And that is how we can try to find weaknesses in our own system. However, we are all humans, so we can try to perform these attacks. But there have been some recent developments. We also have seen a big rise of artificial intelligence. I'm sure many of you have used things like ChatGPT to look up some interesting facts, and definitely not to do your homework. But what we can use these systems for is try and say, hey, suppose that we have this specific application with this specific layout. Can you give me some suggestions of how I could attack this system? And thereby we can try to find ways of having these AIs trying to penetrate the system. We can even try to do this automatically. Last year at DEF CON, which is one of the biggest hacking competitions in the world, organized in Las Vegas, there was a team called Shellfish, and they basically participated in this competition. And there was one person who was looking at something, a challenge involving reverse engineering, and he couldn't figure it out. So he said, well, I can try and stare at this for days on end, but what if I just instruct a large language model, such as ChatGPT, to try and solve this challenge instead? So what he did is he gave the description of the specific hacking challenge. He gave the code that was provided in the hacking challenge, or the binary that they were analyzing. And he said, hey, ChatGPT, can you try to solve this for me? And it was actually able, within about 20 minutes, to come up with the answer. So even at the top hacking competitions in the world, these kind of AI tools are now used to test the systems against vulnerabilities and try to exploit these vulnerabilities. So my message to you is use these kind of tools that we have available now for good. Try to see, if I create my own specific solution, is it vulnerable against anything? Run it through ChatGPT, try to see if it can identify some vulnerabilities in the code that you wrote, because this really helps strengthen the work that you are creating. This is the whole slide. Besides prevention, of course, we still make some mistakes, and we still might leave some very obscure vulnerability that we didn't find in our penetration test that hackers might be able to abuse. So besides preventing, we should also try to focus on detecting whether an attacker is doing something malicious on our system. Now, this is usually done using a combination of intrusion detection systems and a security operations center. The idea of an intrusion detection system is suppose that you have some malware or a virus that has infected your computer. What you do is you put some agents on the computer. And these agents monitor the behavior of the individual devices. So they read system logs, for example, or they look at network traffic that is being produced. And what they are doing is they are producing these types of activities, and they are sending that as data to an intrusion detection system. Now, the intrusion detection system then has a combination of rules, or maybe even a specific piece of artificial intelligence that is trying to monitor this behavior for suspicious activity. And this is basically an example of why my initial attack didn't work when I was on the Wi-Fi here of the university, because they were very likely doing some kind of monitoring. They looked at the network traffic, identified that there was some sort of attack going on, and they blocked that attack while it happened. However, these intrusion detection systems do not only detect, or they mostly focus on detecting and not necessarily blocking. So we are monitoring some suspicious activity, and very often this is sent to a security operations center. And the security operations center takes these security events, as they are called, and a person or maybe even an AI system is looking at these events and see whether they are just some garbage events or whether they should be alerting someone saying, hey, there's an attack going on. Now, why is this person here? Suppose, for example, that you want to log into your university account and you mistype your password. It can happen, right? That could be a sign of someone trying to a lot of different passwords to get into your account. So it might be hacking activity. But it could also be just you forgetting or mistyping your password once. And what this person is basically doing, or sometimes a system is doing, is trying to distinguish between, is this just a one-off odd event that can happen, or is this something actually malicious? Now, once we establish that there's actually something malicious going on, then we create this alert. We investigate the alert to see, okay, what did the attacker do up to this point? And we try to come up with a response plan, saying, okay, how can we try to get rid of this attack? Should we maybe block a specific IP address? Or should we isolate specific programs on the machine? And this is called incident response. This entire process of going from detection to analysis to response. And this is what happens in a security operations center. And this is one of the main lines of defense against attacks that have not been prevented. Now, as I mentioned before, I want to talk a little bit more about capture the flag or CTF competitions. Capture the flags are hacking competitions, which are a legal way to practice and sharpen your hacking skills. There are competitions that you can join as a student. I believe that the Tech University even has a specific hacking team, which was called again, what was the name? El Hackatorio. So if you are interested in this kind of stuff, try to look it up, because Professor Harrison Escobar Vargas is leading that, and I heard with quite some success. We have good students there. That's always nice to see. And basically what they do is they enter these kind of hacking competitions to show that they can penetrate various different systems. And these big hacking competitions sometimes have even prizes. Sometimes they're $100, $500. The big hacking competitions like DEF CON, the one that I mentioned before, I think their main prize is about $2 million. So if you're really good at this stuff, that's a nice way to earn some extra cash. Now, hacking, of course, has a lot of different aspects. What I just showed you is something called web hacking, where you basically look at the web application and try to get into that application, either using cross-site scripting or some other attacks. But you also have capture the flag challenges for different types of categories. For example, cryptography, where you have to break cryptographic ciphers, which requires quite some math background. So if you're into that, cryptography might be interesting. Reverse engineering, given a specific binary of the program, can you figure out what it did? Binary exploitation, given a binary, can you actually provide it with a specific input that would trigger, for example, a null pointer exception, or that would give you administrator access? And there is a category called boxes, which basically says, okay, given this real world server or computer, can you try and actually hack your way into it such that you obtain pseudo privileges? And this is actually something that comes closest to actual penetration testing. So if you want to practice yourself, here are some websites that might be interesting for you to have a look at. The first one is the website that I just showed you. It is great for beginners and when you're learning how to apply your skills in practice. There are a lot of challenges that are, well, beginner friendly, so to say. If you get a little bit more advanced, that hackthebox.com is a great website. It has very advanced challenges and even courses that you could follow to learn how to hack better. The Try Hack Me site is great for penetration testing. You will be given an actual machine that you have a VPN connection to, where the objective is try and get pseudo access so that you can basically take over the entire system. And then finally, cryptohack.org, if you're very much into cryptography. These websites are all legal ways of sharpening your hacking skills. So if you're interested in hacking, do this. Don't go out in the wide open internet and try to hack existing websites or systems, because remember, this is illegal, right? In these websites, you're allowed to do it. Out in the wild, you're not allowed to do it. Suppose that you do find some vulnerability out in the wild by accident, for example, always make sure that you inform the right people. So go to the people that are maintaining the website, say, hey, sorry, but I think I found a bug in your website. This is how you can exploit it. Please try to fix it. Because a lot of organizations actually have what are called bug bounty programs. Let's say if you find a bug in their system, notify them in the right way, and you might even get some cash reward. Depending on what type of system you are able to get into and what kind of privileges you can get into that system, these can be very high rewards. I believe that Apple, if you are able to jailbreak an iPhone, is offering up to $1 million for letting them know. So I think that's a good incentive. I believe if you are able to hack the Chrome browser and get remote code execution, meaning that you could just use a browser using, for example, JavaScript, and then take over the entire computer, I think they offer somewhere about $500,000 US. So this is a very lucrative deal. So, in short, thinking like a hacker, always think, how do I abuse a system? And how do I identify all the pitfalls in a specific environment? And we use this to think better like a defender. If we know how to attack a system, we also know how to avoid the pitfalls that make the system vulnerable. And we have to make sure that we always test our systems thoroughly. So, with this being said, be responsible. Practice your own skills using these kind of capture the flag competitions. Maybe join the university team if you're interested in this. And if you do find a vulnerability, disclose it to the responsible party, because that might even get you some cash rewards. Are there any questions about this first part of the lecture? Yes.
Well, my question is about how do I monitor users without violating privacy?
So the question is, how do you monitor users without violating the privacy? And here I'm guessing that you're looking into this setup. That is quite a good question. There are a couple of ways that this is being approached. So one of them is that what usually happens is that these agents that are installed on the specific systems are only looking into the technical data of a system. So for example, if you have a device, what kind of logs does the device produce? And logs are things like, okay, the user opened a specific file, or we started up a new program. These are generally not as privacy sensitive as some other data, like for example, your social security number that you don't want to delete. Another thing in which we make sure that we prevent leaking this kind of data is by looking at encrypted versions of the data. That is very well researched. For example, if we look at network traffic. So if we use network traffic, a lot of it is over HTTP, which is often encrypted, meaning that it's HTTPS. And this also means that the specific data that is being sent over the internet is being encrypted. Now, how do we analyze that? We analyze that by looking at the metadata instead. So rather than the specific content of a message, we try to see, okay, what server did the user communicate with? How often do they communicate with this server? Does this happen, for example, during working hours, or was it somewhere at midnight for the local user? These are all indicators that can tell us something about, okay, was this suspicious activity, or was it something that was actually normal activity? There is some state-of-the-art research going on in using homomorphic encryption for this kind of detection. What that basically means is that the data that is being sent can be encrypted, but because it is homomorphically encrypted, you can still perform computation on the data. And there is some research going on into that field to try and see, can we use this kind of homomorphic encryption to try and match specific rules to see, okay, is this alert, the cross-site scripting alert, for example, present in the data? And if so, only then we decrypt the data. Otherwise, we keep it encrypted so that no privacy violation occurs. Does that answer your question? Other questions? I think I saw another hand. Yes.
Yeah, you were talking about like uploading your code or your program into AI tools to find vulnerabilities. I was just wondering if it would be harmful if you put it into production, even if you don't upload like any keys or tokens. Could it be harmful?
That's a good question. So is there a risk in uploading your code to an AI system, for example, ChatGPT? Very good that you mention it, because there is a risk. For example, if you don't want your code to be openly available, open source, because it contains, for example, intellectual property that you want to protect, then do not upload it to these AI systems. Because whatever you upload to ChatGPT, they will store and they will use it to train their systems further, but maybe also once an attacker gets access to that stored data, your code might be out open into the street. There are, of course, ways of using these systems locally. So you can run these type of large language models locally if you have a big enough computer or server at your disposal. But indeed, do be careful with uploading your data in these type of models. What I do want to point out is, in terms of security, experts are of the impression that it's usually better to be open with the code that you produce, excluding, of course, secret tokens, for example. Because when you make your code open source, it allows other people not only to try and use your code for malicious purposes, but also gives access to ethical hackers that can try to find vulnerabilities in your code and then help you patch them. So in general, for example, big programs like the Linux kernel are open source, which means that a lot of people have access to it, and a lot of people can try to spot mistakes in the code. that would potentially cause some vulnerabilities. So this is, of course, a trade-off. Do you want your code to be open out in the public? It might be good for security reasons because you have more people looking at the code. But in terms of intellectual property, sometimes that's not desirable. Yeah. Any other questions so far? Yes?
Even the annoying pop-ups are illegal?
That's a good question. It very much depends on the country that both you reside in, as well as the country that the person who made the program resides in. So, for example, Twitter was hacked, I think, in 2014. They had one of these cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Someone created a tweet with a little heart on it, and basically what the tweet did was it would say, take this tweet and look at where the retweet button is and press that retweet button. So everyone who was visiting Twitter, who would see the little heart, would retweet the little heart. And that little heart would then be retweeted by the followers of that person, etc. And it didn't just tweet this little heart, it also popped up this annoying box saying cross-site scripting. So this was basically something that alerted the owners of Twitter in some way of, hey, there's some cross-site scripting vulnerability in your website. They fixed it, luckily. But it is annoying for all the users, right? Because every time they visit the Twitter page, they will get this pop-up message. I believe that in this case, Twitter did not take legal action because they saw, okay, this is a vulnerability on our side, so they fixed it. But depending on the organization, they might be taking legal actions against you. I would say try to avoid it as much as possible because you don't want to get into that hassle. Whether it is actually fully illegal or not, I'm not 100% sure because I'm not a lawyer, but I would stay on the safe side and not use that too much. All right, if that is no more questions, then I think we can go into part 2. And basically, we're going to continue some of our hacking exercises. I'm not sure, are people familiar with SQL injection? Can I get a show of hands? I think that's pretty much everyone, right? In that case, I'm going to skip this one and go into a different exercise instead, which is about passwords. Let me just double check whether this is indeed correctly finishing. So let's try to go and do this one together. It's a little bit of time. We have here a login page. Let's go into our reconnaissance mindset. What do we want to do with the login page? We might want to try and log in, right? Who has a suggestion for a username and password that we can try? No one? I will just go for the classic admin. We log in. An error occurs. Probably we didn't log in quite well. Since you all know SQL injection, let's try and take a little quiz. How can we perform SQL injection? Does anyone have any suggestion? No, not from the audience. Okay, let's take this step by step then. SQL injection. Let's see what happens when we, for example, input a quotation mark, right? Because maybe this is good to show just as a quick refresher. What does SQL injection do? if we have some login system, let's say we put our email at email.com, and we put in some incorrect passwords. Then whatever credentials we put in here will basically be translated into a database query, right? This is all familiar? If we submit this as a query, we basically get a message that says invalid login, please try again. Now, as we can see, this SQL query that's being generated looks like this. And basically whatever we put in here is directly translated into this database query. So what happens now if I put in a colon or a quotation mark? Then this basically becomes invalid syntax, right? Because we have an opening quotation mark here. The quotation mark is then being closed. And then we have a weird floating quotation mark. So what happens if we submit? We get an error saying unrecognized tone. That means that this thing here is vulnerable to SQL injection, which makes sure that we can try to modify this entire query such that, for example, it doesn't check whether the email and password are in the database, but we can make sure that it just says true in the where clause somewhere, and then it will return the entire database. So what we could, for example, do is say, well, we select the name and grade from users, where either the email address is this and the password is incorrect, or true. And true will always be true. So it will basically select all the names and grades from this database, right? Now, of course, we still have this annoying floating quote mark, as well as the semicolon. So what we can do is we can say, okay, with the semicolon, we say this is the end of the query. And we use the double dash to say anything that comes after this is going to be part of a comment. So don't treat this as a query. And when we submit this, we basically return all the data in the database. That's a quick refresher of SQL injection. Now, what if we try this SQL injection in our passwords login system? We can say admin, for example, and admin as password, which is wrong. We get some sort of error that occurs. Now, what we can also say is we want to have admin or true. And we say anything afterwards can be ignored. Let's see what happens then. Okay, we still have an error, but we do have some sort of database dump. We see that there is admin in the database with this large string, and that I am present in the database with this large string. Maybe this is some sort of password. Does anyone have any clue what this might be? A hash, yes. So what happens very often in databases is rather than storing a password directly into the database, you want to make sure that if the database accidentally gets leaked, people are not able to get the passwords of the user. So instead, they hash the password of the user. And a hash is a one-way function that takes an input and produces a random output. However, if you input the same input again, so the same password, it will still output the same hash value. So it looks random, but it's actually deterministic, right? And this is used in authentication. So what does that mean? Can we just log in with the credentials admin and this string? No, Because if we input this string, it will be put into the hash function. It will produce a different kind of hash that is not equal to whatever this is. And therefore, we cannot enter the system because the resulting hash is going to be different than what is in the database. Now, of course, we can also try to exploit some of the humanness of these kind of password systems. Because very often humans just choose a password that is very easy to guess. People might choose 1234 or the phrase password. In fact, I have a list here that is called rocku.txt, which contains, let's see, 14 million most common passwords. And if we have a look at it to see, okay, they are ordered by occurrence. If we look at this in more detail, this is the most common passwords that people use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 through 9. Does anyone see their own password in here? Show of hands? No? So a lot of passwords are in here. In fact, 14 million of them. What we can do is we can try to see some common passwords and in which location they are. Well, we can use a tool called grep, where we put, for example, the word password. We say dash and rocku.txt. And this will give us all occurrences of password in the database. And we see that the most used password, or the password itself, let's see if we can make this, it accepts regular expressions, and you never know which way it is. Password is the 4th most common password. It's visible. And if you think, hey, I'm going to be clever, I'm going to put a password with a capital and then an @ and then put 1, 2, 3 behind it. That is the 10 millionth most common passwords in the database, right? So all of these variations will be in this list. Now, the interesting thing is we can use this list to try and brute force all of these passwords, right? So what we can do is we can create a little file called hashes.txt. We take the hashes that we have here, copy them one by one. Next one. So we basically put them in this file called hashes. And then we use a tool called hashcat. Where we say, okay, we are looking at MD5 hashes, which are the specific type of hash that are used here. We want to do a dictionary attack on the file hashes.txt using this rocku list of passwords. And we want you to output all of these hash passwords into a file called cracked.txt. Right? So once I press enter, what hashcat will do is it will take all 14 million passwords, create the MD5 hash of those passwords, and then check if that MD5 hash is the same as one of the hashes we have in this hashes.txt file. Now, MD5 is a relatively quick hash, so let's see how long it takes for hashcat to try and brute force all of these 40 million passwords. It is thinking a bit, but it took, well, so we said 2 seconds to go through all the 14 million possibilities. Now, as you can see, we have now a file called think it was called cracked. What did we call it? Cracked. Didn't output it there. I think we can do something like hashcat show or something. Let's do this one more time to see if this is indeed. Okay. This is one of the great ways where we can ask ChatGPT how to do this. I think I already asked it before. We can use this comment that says, this is how we have this specific hash that we found, which is equivalent to this specific password. Let's just double check whether that was indeed the hashes of txt. So this specific hash was indeed in our hashes. We found that it is this password. So let's now try and see. Okay, this Thijs guy had the 93 password. So let's try to log in with his credentials. I just pasted the 121212 password in there. And let's see if we log in. We indeed log in and find our flag. Right? So that is how easy it is to try and brute force all of these passwords. Now, how do you defend against such an attack? First of all, if you have a database or login system, do not just dump all credentials like this system does. That's obvious. But also think about what kind of hashes you are using while creating password hashes. MD5 is a hash function that is cryptographically broken, meaning that it is very easy and quick to create a password hash, and it is very it is possible for an attacker to create what is called a collision, namely trying to find a different password that leads to the same password hash. Instead, if you are using an actual login system, use hashes like bcrypt2, which are password hashing functions that have a couple of additional benefits. First of all, is they use what are called salts. A salt basically means that besides a user password, there's also a random value stored in the database. And this value is basically appended to the password before it is put into the hash. Now, the advantage of this is that suppose that you get a specific hash of a person and a different person uses the same password, then because their salts will be different, the final output hash will also be different, which means that a hacker has to basically brute force this attack for every single user in the database. And that slows down the attack by a lot. A second thing that algorithms like bcrypt do is something called key derivation functions. Basically, what happens is they won't just hash the password once, but once they hash the password once, it will be taken as input, new input to the same hash function again. And this is repeated maybe 10,000, maybe 100,000 times. And that makes sure that this hash function becomes a lot slower. So rather than being able to crack 14 million passwords in 2 seconds, we might take maybe even a second for every try in our list of passwords, which makes it maybe take 14 million seconds for every user in our database. And that is even if the user uses such big passwords. So these are ways in which you as developers can actually strengthen these type of login systems. Now, of course, we should also talk about the user side. and that is do not use these kind of weak passwords. In fact, we should encourage all users to use password managers, which basically let you use randomly generated passwords. And we should enable things like two-factor authentication, which means that if a hacker is able to obtain the password of a user, they still need to also be able to, for example, hack into the phone of the user to make sure that they can try to get the second factor required for authentication. With this example, how are we doing in time? Do we still have some time, or is it good? Yeah. Then let's maybe have a look at one final hacking challenge. And then I will open the floor up for questions. And of course, I will be here for further questions, even if you have them afterwards. So we're going to look into a challenge called Get Good. When we open up the page, we get this specific web page. Anyone have any idea what we can do in terms of reconnaissance? Check the source code of the website. Very good suggestion. Let's have a look at the source code. We have this HTML file with a link to the image that we saw. We saw this get good at the top. Maybe we can access the image itself. It's indeed the image that we found. Any other suggestions? So one of the things that you might have seen is here in the URL, we have a couple of paths. We have a URL path, which basically says where the file is located. So what happens if we just remove this from the file path? You see, hey, this is a directory. And this directory contains the JPEG file that we just observed. That's interesting, right? Because this website and many websites are basically organized in a kind of folder structure, which means that different folders, or also known as directories, contain different parts of the website. So if you have different web pages, they are just files in different folders. And this also allows us to move up folders, for example, by simply removing this image. And then we see, hey, we have some other data stored as well, like JavaScript that is stored on the website, or cascading style sheets that show what the website should look like. And what we can even do is something called directory traversal. And there's various tools for this. One example is called GoBuster. And what these tools do is they will try all different kinds of paths for websites to see, hey, is there something interesting located here? In terms of time, I won't go through the entire GoBuster tool, but suppose that we would have run it. It would find a file called flag.html. And that seems interesting, right? Because here we have something called flag, which has something of the flag format. It doesn't contain the text like we are used to, but this is still an interesting find. And what happens if we try to look at the source code here? We see that indeed there's this flag, but there was a comment saying, okay, hey guys, let's not push the flags into the public Git repository, right? Because we don't want this kind of sensitive information out there for hackers to find. But what is interesting about this? Any suggestions?
If it was redacted, it was there before.
If it was redacted, it was there before. And we know that there is a Git repository here, right? And I'm not sure I think everyone has used Git before here, right? So you know that Git is a version system. So there must have been probably a previous version that did include this code. Now, what do we know about Git repositories? They often contain something called a .git file or a folder. So what if we check whether that .git is available here? So I'm doing the directory traversal to the .git folder. And now let's remove the source and just look at the full version. And we see that there is a folder contained here, right? And this is basically the entire Git versioning. So all versions of the web page are stored in this local folder. Now, what can we do? We can look through this to see if we can try to get to the previous version somewhere. Or we could do something else, which is, in my opinion, a little bit easier. We can say to we make a new directory. Let's call it a temporary directory. And what we can do is we can use a program called curl. I think, or maybe even wget. I never know which one. Well, as we've learned, let's ask ChatGPT. New chat. How can I use curl to download a .git repo at this specific location? It, of course, gives an important note that we shouldn't access this from someone else as a repository. Curl doesn't do recursive downloads, but wget does. So let's just copy this script. Now it is downloading all of the contents of the Git repository, which might take a little bit of time because there's quite a lot of information in there. And while this is busy working, I will open up a different terminal where we can already see that the Git folder is being downloaded. And if there is a Git folder present, we can do stuff like Git status to say, hey, what is all present in this Git repository? And we should probably wait a little bit before it is downloaded. Might take a while. But we can also do the Git versioning. So we can check out a previous Git commit locally, right? Because we have the entire history of this website now locally downloaded. Or at least, if it is doing so, it's always taking a bit of time. I'm hoping I'm not using all of your data. I'm still on this Wi-Fi, of course. Okay, it has finished. So let's see. There are some files here that are in the Git repository, but we can do something like git log, where we basically see the previous versions, right? So here we have an initial commit by some person. And then I was smart enough to say, hey, guys, I removed the flag. So let's now give users access to that flag. However, what happens if we take this specific commit and check it out? So we say, hey, let's revert back to this specific commit. We are given a flag.html now in our local directory. And here we can visit the THS flag contents. I'll make it a little bit bigger. And let's check if that actually works for our challenge. Suppose that we paste it here. We submit the flag. Congratulations, we solved it. So with this, I hope to have given you a little bit of an insight into how we as hackers approach these kind of challenges, how we look at specific systems to see are they vulnerable against anything. And what I want you to try and take away from this is that by looking as a hacker towards these systems, we also, as developers, become better in protecting our systems against potential vulnerabilities. So with that being said, if you're interested in doing any hacking related stuff, please contact Dr. Hersel and Van Vargas to maybe join the hacking team. And if not, at least make sure that when you're developing your own software, try to keep this in mind. If you don't like to do the hacking yourself, hire someone else to do the penetration testing for you, because it really strengthens the system that you're building. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. Are there any questions? Yes.
How expensive is that penetration test?
How expensive is a penetration tester? That is a very good question. It depends a little bit on the company that you ask for to pen test your system. Usually, big consultancy companies do this kind of work, and there the hourly rate is roughly between $100 and $200. So depending on how much time you want those penetration testers to spend on hacking your system, it can be very expensive if you have an entire team trying to gain access to your system, or if you want to do a quick check, it can be relatively cheap. So that very much depends on the size of the penetration test that you want to have. What very often happens is that these penetration tests are done in a company that is also trying to do the defensive side. So, for example, the detection and response side. And what the organizations do then is they hire an external team of penetration testers, which try to hack into the system. And they try to see whether the defensive side can actually detect whether the hack is going on or not. And these kind of interplays are called red teaming, where the team is trying to hack into the system, and blue teaming, where a different, usually internal team, is trying to detect the potential hack and try to mitigate this as quickly as possible. Any other questions? If not, then I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture.
Nice to do this to the slide 52. Just un pequeño anuncio nada más.
Claro. Sí, aquí en la lista de las páginas que mencionaba Thijs hace un rato, en la segunda, la de harddevops.com, el TEC tiene un equipo universitario ahí formado.